to the Make a Mental Note podcast, where mental health professionals share information and perspectives that illuminate, educate, and is worthy of a mental note. And now your host, Chris Quarto.
Hi, everyone. This is Chris Quarto. Welcome again to the Make a Mental Note podcast. My mental health tip for today has to do with adapting. How many times have you been in situations where things haven't gone your way and you think to yourself, well, this really stinks? And maybe there's a good reason for you to feel that way. But it doesn't really do you or anyone else any good to feel resentful or upset because things didn't turn out the way you thought they should. The challenge is for you to adapt to your circumstances. So telling yourself, you know what, things didn't turn out the way I wanted them to, and that's okay. Or maybe it's not okay. But this is the hand I've been dealt, and I'm going to play my cards the best way I can and as fairly as I can. Now, you're probably thinking, yeah, right, that's easier said than done. And you know what? I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. It's really a process, isn't it, that most of us have to work through to be able to think about situations this way so we can adapt to them. Our emotional reactions is what makes it challenging to view things this way. But when the anger or frustration or whatever emotion you're experiencing starts to die down and you're able to think rationally again, you might ask yourself, well, is there anything I can learn or take away from this situation that'll make it more palatable? And if you're really feeling adventurous, tell yourself, you know what? Things don't always have to turn out the way I think they should. So my challenge for you this week is to try out some of these things when something doesn't go your way. Okay, my guest this week is Raychelle Lohmann, who's going to be talking about women survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And you know what? These women are in situations where they're challenged to adapt or have had to adapt to circumstances that life has dealt them, and it's certainly not an easy process for them. So let's listen to what Raychelle has to say about this topic. Hi, everyone. This is Chris Quarto. Welcome again to the Make a Mental Note podcast. I am joined today by Raychelle Lohmann, who's a licensed professional counselor and an author. And Raychelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, if you wouldn't mind, tell the mental note-taking audience a little bit about who you are and what you do for a living.
Sure. I wear many hats right now, actually, but one of the things that I have done for the past 18 years is a professional school counselor, and I've worked at levels middle school through high school,
okay.
And I currently work in an early college model. I'm also an LPC in the states of North Carolina and South Carolina, licensed professional counselor,
All right.
And have been enjoying another part of my career, which opened up several years ago, which is writing. So I enjoy writing self-help books, and I enjoy writing parenting information to help people better understand teens, and working with professionals that work with this special population as well.
That's great. And I want to talk a little bit about one particular book that you came out with in a few minutes. But before we get into that, Raychelle, let's look at your story about how you got into the helping profession. What kind of drew you to the area of counseling, of all things?
I remember two specific times looking back. One was actually during my high school, my last year of high school, where I had a family member who was struggling with addiction and had to go to AA meetings, and it was my grandfather, and I've written about this as well, and he needed help reading and interpreting the demographic.
Okay.
Report. My dad had been deployed at the time, so it was me helping my mom, stepping into that role.
Mm-hmm.
And as I read the demographic questionnaire to him, I really witnessed him reflecting back on years of his past and his drinking. And throughout that questionnaire, and I really don't know the pivotal moment in that, Chris, but throughout the questionnaire, I started to notice this path that he was walking from past to present. And maybe it was sitting with his granddaughter and having to go through this past history. I felt the change happen in the room. There was just something powerful within that dialogue he and I was having together. And he stopped drinking.
Wow.
After that. And I always had heard it's not too late to change, but it gets harder as you get older. And he broke that myth in front of my very eyes. You know,
Holy cow.
That is something even now as I'm older, have made a decision to go back to school, and I've had people go, it must be harder now that you're older and you have these responsibilities. And I use him as a role model that knows at any point in time in life, if you make a conscientious choice and you really want something, you can go for it.
It's never too late, is it?
And it's never too late. It's never too late. And I think the second point that kind of helped me catapult into counseling, if you will, was I started as a music major, and I was a voice major at a small school on scholarship, and had only imagined myself being an instrumentalist and a vocalist my whole life until I took a psychology course. And the instructor of that course really planted some seeds and sparked my curiosity. And then I realized that those two things together, I really had a hunger and a drive to help people. And that's what opened the world of counseling to me.
Isn't that interesting? That, you know, you look back, because we've had a lot of guests on this podcast who have had personal experiences that kind of got them interested, kind of lit the flame, so to speak, of their interest in the field of counseling. And it sounds like for you, the experience with your grandfather was a pivotal point, but also that taking that psychology class, it sounded like that opened your eyes to opportunities that you weren't even aware of.
It really did. I often refer to when I'm speaking with teens as almost like going into an ice cream store when you go to college and getting that little sampler spoon. Because there's so many different flavors. There's so many different electives, courses, even within the counseling and psychology fields, these wonderful electives that you may not have even thought existed until you taste it, until you give it a try.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, you're like me, Raychelle. I started off as a music major. I don't know how long you lasted. I lasted about a year, and I had to get out of it. I just couldn't handle it anymore because it was just taking all the joy out of music for me. So I changed over to sociology and psychology after that, and I was a much happier person. So that's an interesting story. Well, tell us a little bit about your experiences. You wrote a book, and if you wouldn't mind, could you share the name of that book with the audience? And then tell us a little bit about why you were interested in writing that book.
Sure. The most recent book that I wrote, is that the one? Yeah, it's the Sexual Trauma Workbook for Teen Girls, and it was just released in May. And this, I'm learning that as an author, once the topic comes on your plate, it's not something that you can put aside for very long if it's something that is destined to be, because it keeps coming to the forefront of your mind and almost keeps taunting you and haunting you until it becomes an actual piece. And that's what this book really was, through another personal experience of someone I had met. They had shared their story with me, and I was directly involved. It was a friend of mine. And
this was an adult friend?
It is. It was an adult friend. It was actually an adult friend's daughter who now speaks publicly on the issue of sexual trauma and is an advocate for people. But I wrote a blog for Psychology Today. I write for a blog for Psychology Today, and she allowed me to share her story in that blog, and I thought that would kind of satisfy this need for this book. I thought maybe that's how I just need to get the word out. And I had actually a psychologist from Czechoslovakia contact me and tell me what a deep need that blog was in her country, and ask me if she could translate it into her language. And that just kind of reinforced me knowing that there is something out there that needs to be out there for adolescents who have experienced sexual trauma. So doing what I did is I went on the search. What's out there for these young teens? At the time, I wasn't even sure I was going to gear it towards girls, to be honest with you. But I wanted to know what's out there, speaking to their language, speaking to where they are developmentally. And sadly, I couldn't find anything.
Wow.
And most of the help guides and the really good, rich, depth guides and material was written towards an adult. And working with teens as long as I had, when I looked through that, I thought, wow, we're really missing a point of communicating with them. And I had another woman share with me, whenever she was a teen, she would get these books and she would look through them, and that was her way of getting help. But these books were written to an older adult. So that I really wanted to put something out there for youth, and then I started writing it for girls and boys, because I knew that for everyone, for all teens.
Right.
And I started realizing when I did that, I got into the book started to lose its power, because I was trying to use the terminology, being politically correct, and trying to find the scenarios, the vignettes that maybe one population would identify with, but another one wouldn't. And it wasn't unifying. It wasn't in unison, if we'll go back to our music. It just was not in unison. And that's how I see my writing. When I write anyway, it's my musical. It's like I'm composing a piece that needs to blend perfectly together. So then when I was writing the vignettes, I wondered, well, why am I making these hypothetical vignettes based on semi-real experiences from my experience of working with these teens? Why am I not just reaching out and speaking to women who have experienced this? So that led to about 15 intense interviews with women who are survivors of sexual trauma and sexual assault. And at first I thought, this is going to be kind of hard to go and find these women who would want to talk confidentially and anonymously about this. And what I realized is, just by connecting with one or two people, and my friend included, the one that really sparked the idea for this book with her experience, they started contacting me.
Wow.
And it was a network. It was this network of women who had these experiences, who had become friends and networked together and were amazingly powerful, intellectual women who had pushed themselves to achieve so much based on their experiences, and some of them insisted that I put their whole name in the book.
Oh, wow.
So, we went through things with my publishers where confidentiality forms were signed, and forms were signed with disclosing what the book's purposes was, and then if they requested their name stay in it, they had to sign another form. So I know we have some readers out there that are in school right now and may be thinking about writing some things. So there are, legal parameters that have to go in place when putting a book like this together, dealing with the confidential nature that this is. But with all of that, the stories and talking on the phone and listening to the journeys, if you will, the journeys these women have gone through, from some of them had experienced incestual relationships in their home. Some of them were traumatized through date rape. Some of them were in relationship abuse. And just listening to the stories and the common themes that these women kept bringing to the forefront of the feelings of guilt and shame and depression, and some of them engaging in risky behavior, self and the self-defeating thoughts that they experienced. It was really a powerful experience for me as a counselor, listening to what they went through and then how they found resilience to overcome it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So you were starting to talk a little bit about these themes that they've had. So what were some of those themes as you listen to these stories? I heard you say a little bit about the feelings that go along with it, like the shame and things of that nature. But how about just in the stories themselves? Do you find that these women had any commonalities in their stories in terms of how they went about in their relationships with people who were abusive toward them, how they reacted toward these other people who were abusive toward them, and then in turn how their relationships were affected as a result of that? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Raychelle.
Absolutely. One of the most present themes as they were looking back on their past life was, or not past life, but their past, was, why me? That a lot of the women say, because this happened in their most of the 15 that I interviewed, 14 of them happened in their childhood and their adolescent years.
All right. So
it was this constant, why me? And then this sense of anger, why did he or why did she choose me to do this to? What did I do to deserve this?
Exactly.
And that became a seed at such a young age to be planted where around that seed anger cultivated confusion, because most of these instances it was with people that they knew or they trusted. And so to have that sense of trust taken away from them, that sense of self and the guilt and the shame that they started to feel that something must be wrong with me to make me susceptible to this. And so that was one thing. And because that shame and that guilt, that was that theme that just kept emerging, why me, shame and guilt, they kept it to themselves. And I remember one young lady said, she was in a relationship during her adolescent years. She said, when I told my mom, she said, well, you won't be able to wear white on your wedding anymore.
Oh my gosh.
And so to be, if you can, imagine a 15 or 14-year-old child, and all of a sudden you have to muster up the courage to even say anything because it's already eating you alive, and then to go to the person that you trust, that you think is going to protect you, and then be shamed and not want that even out in the public. The family's response was, we need to keep this quiet.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And then she has to, on top of being sexually traumatized, she has to go through this second feeling of shame with her family.
Right.
And feeling, again, what did I do wrong? How could I have kept this from happening to me? This must be my fault.
Right.
And there was another thing, it's the blame. It's the victim blame that she was putting on herself.
There's something wrong with me.
That's right. That's right. And so that took up a large part of those adolescent years, with a lot of the pain, and as a result, engaging in unhealthy coping skills, drinking. Some of these women even shared that they became promiscuous because their value of self, their value of body had been diminished. And so because one of them shared the mindset, because I had already screwed up, what else was left?
Oh.
And if I could drink or if I could take drugs, it would numb the pain.
Sure. Yeah,
I wouldn't have to feel it.
That makes total sense. And I wonder, Raychelle, how many of these women did you interview? How many of them ended up in relationships with people who were bad for them?
I can tell you, I didn't ask specific relationship questions into the future, but some did share with me that because of trust issues, that they did find someone that they cared for, and that in those relationships, because they couldn't fully trust them, that sense of trust had been, if we look back developmentally all the way back to Erickson, right?
Yeah.
That sense of trust had been destroyed at such a young age that created a dissonance between them and their partner. And many of the women were divorced or they weren't in relationships. And one of the women that was in a relationship, she said, it's hard, I have to keep lines of communication open with my partner because sometimes he may feel that I'm pulling away from him, but I'm not. It's because of this sheltered person I have inside of me. And having to remind myself that I am safe, that I am okay. And one of the women that I spoke with went into like a law enforcement type work because, the fields these women chose from, I spoke with doctors, attorneys, researchers, officers. I mean, phenomenal ministry. I spoke with one of the females I spoke with is works in ministry. The other one is a national speaker on this issue. So these women really took this traumatic and horrific event and at some point in time found this amazing amount of resilience to turn it around and say, no, this is not going to define who I am. And they found these powerful careers to put that energy into. And now many of them advocate and speak on public venues. And one has even written a book on it herself and appeared on the Montel Williams show.
Wow. Well, this goes back to what you said at the beginning of the podcast, Raychelle, that it's never too late. And
right.
But I think what makes it difficult from how you were describing these, and you mentioned Erickson and looking at developmental issues, if you look at some of these women who were traumatized at young ages, and if you consider how all of us, are, as we grow and develop, we kind of have this core of who we are. And if that core is much of that core is based on distrust of other people, then how can you expect a person to trust as they grow and develop? And, they get into adolescence and they start to have romantic relationships. It's got to be so difficult for them to deal with that.
Right. And that's something, that kept coming. That was definitely one of the common themes.
Yeah.
And another theme was just the fear of, will this happen again? And that kept them from living their lives fully. The flashbacks that they experienced, the nightmares that would, once you got, one of the women was traumatized by rape. She was raped by a serial rapist who ended up, the police knew that he was a serial rapist, and it ended up that he did break into the house of a woman who had been previously victimized by rape, and because of that, she kept a firearm on her, and she she shot him before he raped her. And the police knew this was the individual that had raped this other woman because of tattoos and markings on his body. So they were able to piece together the case. And one of the things she said is, for the longest time, I would get in the shower, or you would hear a pop in the house because the rapist had broken into the house at night. And she said, just the fear when most people are in the shower and you've got that curtain closed, you don't think. She goes, I feared for my life for so long.
You're totally defenseless.
Just to be. That's right. But she had been every sense of security that she had, because not only was it the sexual traumatization, but it was also the violation of someone coming in your house and threatening your life.
That's right.
And then taking advantage of her. So her story was extremely powerful in what and whenever she recounted, and she now is one that goes and speaks on a national forefront to help women, and she actually goes into the prisons and speaks to those who were serving time for rape.
It's got to be so difficult for them to, well, even if you think about a child or an adolescent who this is either happening to or has happened to, for them to make the decision to tell somebody has got to be so incredibly difficult because of those reasons that you were talking about, the shame and the confusion and all these feelings that go along with it. It's got to be so difficult for them.
A lot of them didn't ever tell anyone until their adult years. One of them, the incest, the rape was happening within the home, within many of the siblings, but no one talked about it. No one knew it, because the way it was happening, they thought it was just them, and there were, of course, threats. So no one spoke of it at all until the adult years, and the families broken since that. Relationships are trying to form back, but there never was this healthy relationship dynamic to begin with. And one of the women that I spoke to when things were happening within the home with a family member would say, she shared with me, I would go outside, and this was almost like my mental way of coping, and I would watch airplanes go across my head at night, in the sky, and I would say, I wonder where that's going. One day I'm going to get out of here. One day I'm going to be on one of those. And that was a coping mechanism for her to go outside and know that one day she would get freedom from that environment. And I did ask her, how did you survive those years when you were in that environment? And she said, I would hyper-focus on things. I would find things that were safe, and I would just focus solely on that. And she said, because if not, I lived in fear. And I didn't want to live in fear. So many of the women, whether it was unhealthy or more healthy, we would say the airplane would be, versus drinking or taking drugs, they found a way to cope, because a lot of them didn't get counseling until they were in their 20s, because that was when they started talking about it.
I don't know if you asked them this question, Raychelle, but what made them decide to come out with this, to share this information with people, to not keep it a secret anymore, that, I'm finally, this is the time that I think I'm going to tell somebody? What is it that prompted them to make the decision to tell somebody what had happened?
I can't speak for all of the women that I spoke with, but I do know that some of them, when they got into their college years, they started talking to friends, and then that friend's like, what? That happened to you? And, that's not right. And that was like the first time it was like, that's not right. That's not the typical, that's not normal. That's not what happens. And then it was like, wow, it's not me all of a sudden, kind of that veil of, why me? I must be flawed. Something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
That veil started to come down. And then, from still having nightmares, or possibly it was the drinking that got them to go to a counselor, or because they were having relationship problems, and because of the power of counseling, that trained professional was able to get deeper into their past, so
Right.
they actually divulged that they had been sexually traumatized. And then that counselor was able to jump into what we know empirically works with survivors of sexual trauma, from dialectical behavioral therapy to mindfulness, acceptance, commitment therapy to behavioral therapy, and restructuring those nightmares and really giving tools, grounding tools, if you will, that help these women learn to cope.
Yeah, and I guess I'm kind of curious about that, because there's got to be thousands upon thousands of women who have gone through this and who are in need of counseling. And when you think about these people who come into counseling, what do you think what are the types of things do you think that really help them get from that point where they initially come in to see a counselor to the point where they're doing okay and they don't need counseling anymore? What kind of helps them get from point A to point B to help them deal with these past traumas, Raychelle?
Honestly, and I think counselors are instrumental in this, but I can't say it's just a counselor. Every one of these women found a circle of support. They found they found other women who had been through something similar to them, and that feeling, and I know we say this a lot in counseling, but that feeling you're not alone,
right,
really resonated with them, because they have lived alone with their nightmare, many of these women, for years. So just knowing, you mean there's someone else out there that feels exactly and experiences exactly what I've experienced, and that's, I think, why the women started contacting me or said, hey, I want to help, I want to contribute, I want to give back. If I only had a book like this whenever I was going through this, I wish I would have had something like this.
Yeah.
So I think that was something amazing. Actually, I have because in the book there are excerpts from these women, and I have one right here that speaks to the power. If you'd like for me to just share it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. In the book, what it is I put my story, and then the individual, this individual wanted her name. She wanted to own this story.
All right.
It gave her powers. She said, right after the incident, the first person I wanted was my mom, because she gave me comfort, support, and unconditional love. While Mom was amazing, I quickly realized I needed someone who had gone through this before and came out okay on the other side. I desperately needed to talk to a survivor, someone who could truly understand what I was going through. I found this person and many others in a rape crisis support group. This group was made up of people who were like me, people who could identify with my experience. It was comforting to go into a room with these people, my friends, and feel like I wasn't crazy. I was surrounded by people who knew exactly what I was going through, and they didn't judge me. These people formed my circle of support, and I don't know where I'd be today without them.
And you know what that communicates to me, Raychelle? I'm not alone. That's really what that tells me, is that social support plays such a crucial role. And, it's just not for victims of sexual trauma. If you look at AA and, a lot of different groups out there that provide support. And I think that there's so much power in those social support groups, don't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do believe that being in a support group that's led by a trained professional is very important, especially with issues such as this, to have someone there who knows how to facilitate the group process and help the group grow therapeutically in the journey, but also bond together. I really think that's important.
So what do you think some of the challenges are in working with women like this, or even adolescents who are going through sexual trauma, have had these experiences? You see them in counseling. What are some of the challenges that they're dealing with or that you deal with as the counselor in helping them, Raychelle?
I think one of the largest challenges is still being in that state of denial,
Mm-hmm.
like that numbness, like this didn't happen to me, this, and just kind of rejecting and suppressing, because that's what we know happens is oftentimes when something traumatic like this has happened, people suppress it for a while, and then it manifests itself years later through flashbacks, through nightmares. So getting that individual to feel comfortable enough and in a counseling session, and that really takes a lot of a Rogerian approach there,
Mm-hmm.
because they, again, trust has been violated, it's been broken, shattered, so it really takes rapport building and genuine, unconditional, positive regard in that session to build that relationship, especially with that teen, because they're questioning already and where they're at in their development, to get them to open up honestly with you. Because if you think about an adolescent too, their body image is coming into play. It's embarrassing to talk about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's embarrassing to even for many teens to even talk about puberty,
Right.
let alone something traumatic that's happened to them while they're going through puberty.
That's right.
So I think it takes someone who is patient, from a counselor in, patient, and really creates a non-judgmental, supportive, trusting, caring, authentic environment for that teen to be able to make that connection and to let the teen know. Go ahead. I tell the teens that I work with, this is a judgment-free zone. I am here to help you. I am here for you. It's okay to talk with me about uncomfortable things. It's okay. We'll go through this together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what they need to know is you're not alone. I'm not an expert. We're in this together. And my job is to help you get through it.
Isn't that amazing? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just, it's really back to understanding where these kids are developmentally.
And I was just going to say, isn't it amazing that the things that you were talking about in working with these adolescents are just the core basic counseling skills, aren't they? I mean, the things that we learn, you learned, I learned when we were going through counseling training, that these are the core elements in helping develop an alliance, and that you have to maintain these throughout the entire course of counseling. But this is critical. I mean, you have to have these basics to help, in particular, these types of people who are struggling with these issues. And the other thing, too, you were talking about how maybe for the first time, this is something that they're going to start talking about, because up to this point in time, they've been in denial, they've been repressing. And so I think another important thing that's part of this, Raychelle, and, in terms of just kind of helping you enter their world, is to understand what is the function of that behavior, of what's the function of the denial, what's the function of the repression. And I think that if you look at what they're dealing with, they don't want to experience those negative feelings, whether it's shame, embarrassment, hurt. And if they can just repress them and not even have to deal with them, that's better than having to deal with them. And of course, I think what makes it challenging in the counseling context is we're inviting them to experience these feelings. And boy, that's not a real easy thing for them, is it?
No, it's not. And I'm proud you brought that up. There was actually 2 points you brought up. The first one is I recently taught a course at North Carolina State University, and it was really emphasizing those micro skills. You know, that those basic counseling skills are really key.
Yes.
And you know, we can't brush over them. You know, I know so many people who are in their master's program, et cetera, you know, they're ready to find their theory, and that oftentimes is confusing, you know, what kind of theoretical approach, and oftentimes it's like, well, I'll do person-centered. But really, the key, the very first step is get those micro skills down pat. Know how to paraphrase, understand the body language, be able to synthesize information, and really focus on those. So if you have any listeners out there that are currently master's level students, I would highly encourage them with my experience, 18 years worth with adolescents, micro skills, counseling skills, the basics. Focus on that. The theory will develop.
That's great. Yeah, great advice right
there. The book, as far as walking through sequentially in the book, we actually started at a very safe level. You know, it's first of all, because you don't want to delve right into the deep issues. You need to make sure that the adolescent's taking care of herself. You know, the person's taking care of themselves. So, you know, go ahead, focus on the why me. We got to address that right up, because that's that question that's going through their mind continuously. But then teaching them the basic skills, you know, are you you sleeping enough? Do you have an outlet? Do you exercise? You know, do you know how to breathe? Because I work with teens with many different things that they bring to the session. And one of the things that I can teach them immediately is how to take an abdominal breath. Because even though it makes logical sense, we're so busy running around, and we're so busy when we get angry or frustrated or panic or anxious to chest breathe.
Right.
That we forget that there is actual power within taking a full breath. And so I'll use the analogy of, let's pretend there's a balloon in your stomach, and our mission is to blow it up. And, you know, I'll cut the lights off, I'll create the environment, and I'll teach the teen how to breathe. And it's amazing when they open their eyes to see that more relaxed, that their facial muscles have relaxed.
Yeah.
They seem more at peace. And that simple technique of how to breathe can be taught in a couple of minutes. But here's the key. It has to be practiced, and then it has to transpire over into their life so they can make sure that they're making a conscientious effort every day, several times through the day, to stop and breathe a deep breath.
There's,
we also...
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's power in simplicity. Yeah.
Absolutely. And mindfulness centers around breathing appropriately as well, and kind of getting yourself centered into the present moment.
Sure.
You know, and we also discuss, you know, taking care of yourself nutritionally and emotionally, being able to do some emotional regulation, self-management, taking care of yourself, and also identifying soothing behaviors, self-soothing. And one of the things that we did was we created, I can't remember if it's in my latest book or if it was in a previous book, but it was like a self-soothing kit or a code blue box.
Oh.
It's kind of like that box of goodies.
Yeah.
That you go to whenever you're having one of those days and you just need to escape. And it could be a stuffed animal in that box. There could be a picture of your favorite place that brings back pleasant memories that you've gone to.
Could there be a Hershey's chocolate bar?
Absolutely. Just make sure you visit your box often so it doesn't expire. It could be chocolate. There's power in chocolate. It could be a poem. It could be an inspirational quote. There's, you know, it could even be something that has a scent to it that kind of help soothe you, lavender or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's really about finding things that comfort you.
Yeah, that's
and
interesting.
that's one of the things we wanted to give to our readers, is to have this kit, this thing that you can go to that's full of feel goods.
Well, and the thing I like about that is it's concrete, and I bet that would really appeal to adolescents to have something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Well, Raychelle, this last part of the interview is what I call make a mental note, and it's something that you feel is important for the audience to make a mental note of in terms of improving their mental health or their relationships. Do you have any tips or words of wisdom that might help an audience member improve their mental wellness or their relationships?
Actually, I do, and it's something that I'm really have to be conscientious of sometimes to make sure that I do. But there really is power in living in the moment, and so in our lives, so many times we have so many things going on, especially with social media bombarding us 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
that we forget that right now is more important than any other time, because right now is all we have. And just stopping and paying attention, really dig into your five senses. What are you seeing right now? What is around you that you can touch, that you can feel? What noises are surrounding you? What's going on in your environment? And I think oftentimes we forget to just stop and enjoy this present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment that we live in right now has so much power in keeping us healthy and grounded and mindful
Yeah.
of today.
That's good advice. It reminds me of what my major professor said in my doctoral program. Told me, he said, Chris, don't be so focused on the end goal of getting the degree and stuff that you don't enjoy the journey, the process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of the same thing that you were saying, is that you basically have to stop and smell the roses every now and then, and
That's
not
right.
forget that there are these basics, and don't take things for granted. And that's great advice. Well, Raychelle, if somebody wants to contact you, either just about your book or counseling or anything along those lines, are there ways that they can get a hold of you?
There are, and the best way is to go straight to my website. It's Raychelle, RayChellece, Lohmann, LOHMANN.com. And there, they can send me an email, a message directly from that site. I'm also on rehabs.com. Psychology Today, all of these venues have links to reach out to me and access me, and sharecare.com. So a Google of my name and you can get to my website and send me a message, and I welcome questions, and if I have resources I can share, I'm all about sharing those for helping professionals.
Oh, that's great. And I'll make sure and put all the links for your contact information and show notes so people can access those. And also for your book, Sexual Trauma Workbook for Teen Girls, we'll make sure and put that in the show notes as well if anybody wants to get that. So, well, Raychelle, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been very insightful, and I hope that listeners got a lot out of this, and maybe there are some listeners who have been the victims of sexual trauma, and hopefully if they haven't told anybody or haven't gotten any help for it yet, hopefully maybe this will kind of spark them to go along that path. So thanks a lot for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, great stuff from Raychelle. I don't know about you, but I learned a lot from this episode. We have such great guests on the Make a Mental Note podcast. I just love it. Well, here's my mental notes takeaway from today. Too often, women blame themselves or feel guilty and ashamed for having been the victim of childhood sexual abuse. And two important keys to healing involve rejecting the assumption that sexual abuse was their fault in obtaining support from others who have gone through similar experiences. Now, here's my question for you. How does childhood sexual abuse impact close relationships later in life? Well, for some women, their sense of trust and safety and security was destroyed at a young age. And because close relationships involve making yourself vulnerable, it's understandable why they might have difficulty developing close relationships as they grow and develop. So having to continually remind themselves that they're safe in their current relationships is one of the keys to developing healthy relationships. And of course, like I said at the very beginning of this podcast, this is a process. All right, well, if you'd like the show notes for today's podcast episode, then please visit my website, chrisquarto.com. That's ChrisQuarto.com. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast by using an app such as Downcast. The episodes, as I've said before, come out every Thursday. So if you get an app, you can have them downloaded automatically to your phone or iPad, whatever mobile device or computer that you're using. Thanks so much for listening to the Make a Mental Note podcast. Spread the word and let others know about this. Have a great rest of the week.